tell them. Just tell them. Good evening and welcome to the second of two Inside Governments for the fall 2019 semester here at KU Community College and broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon, Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, ARMA, as well as the college's radio station 89.1. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. One of the chief assets of this region are our gorgeous lakes and the water they supply. In recent years, increases in harmful algae blooms, as well as increased presence of nutrients going into our lakes, from whether it's agricultural runoff, development, or other sources, have been an issue for local governments where they've put resources into our lakes in trying to prevent their deterioration. The City of Auburn and Town of OWASCO have been no different in financing the OWASCO Lake Watershed Management Council. They hired on Dr. Adam EFFLER to be their executive director, I think about a year ago, and he is knee-deep in numerous matters, no pun intended, regarding OWASCO Lake. We have asked him on to give us an update. He's been very flexible because we've had to move things around because of the forums to talk about what happened in 2019, what's on the agenda for you, including rules and regulations, as well as financing, which was covered in a story in the Citizen over the weekend. So, welcome back.
Thank you, Guy. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, for those who don't know, and again, we were joking, we have to shorten the title of the, or at least OWL is just 4 letters, but what is the OWASCO Lake Watershed Management Council?
The OWASCO Lake Watershed Management Council is a 501c3 nonprofit local development corporation.
And so who sits on your board?
So we have membership and 3 members that really are the leaders of the board. They include representatives from the City of Auburn, the Town of OWASCO, and Cayuga County. We then have an extended board of directors that is made up of municipality representatives. And those are representatives from towns, of which there are 15, and villages within the watershed.
So who are your 3 main reps on the board?
We have Ed Wagner, the supervisor.
Chair.
He's the chair of the board. He is the supervisor for the Town of OWASCO. We have Aileen McNabb Coleman. She is county ledge. Mm-hmm. And then we have Debbie McCormick, who is a city councilor. Yes.
So you have this board. How do you, well, I guess more than anything else, what is your main task? What does the council do?
So the mission of the council is to advance actions for the protection and restoration of the watershed for the benefit of improving water quality for the lake and protecting the lake from further harm.
And so how long have you been in the position?
I've been in the position a little over 8 months. I started back in early March.
I was trying to think when you were last on, I think it was about 2 weeks after. I think Ed Wagner came here with you, and you were just like literally dropped in the deep end.
That's right.
But one change, so where this was not a staffed organization 8 months ago, you now just recently added another staff person, correct?
That's correct, yes. We have 3 staff members now, including myself. We had Caitlin Shanahan come on board at the end of September. She is our new Deputy Watershed Inspector.
Where'd she come from?
She was a resident of Syracuse, but now I'm happy to say she moved. She is now a resident of Auburn.
Just in time for the census, but keep going.
Sure.
Everybody counts.
Yeah. So her academic background is in environmental science and policy. She was educated and has an undergraduate degree from SUNY ESF out of Syracuse. And she's very enthusiastic and excited about the opportunity.
And what will she be doing?
Her number one role, her number one objective for her position is to expand aerial coverage within the watershed for surveillance activities and for inspection.
So does that mean drones? What does that mean?
Well, I say aerial surveillance. That word can be used sort of interchangeably. It sometimes refers to drones. We do have a drone for the program. But what I mean is more coverage in terms of the area that can be covered within the watershed.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah. And
because you have a watershed that's one of the larger ones in central New York. How large is it?
That's right. It's 208 square miles.
So it covers areas outside of Cayuga County proper.
That's true. Yes, it includes Tompkins County as well as Onondaga County.
So parts of just over the edge of Skaneateles, and then parts going down as far as Groton.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So continue with her work. But it's a large area.
Well, so the watershed size is important, and I'd like to make comment there. So the watershed size relative to the size of the lake is one of the greatest disparities, in fact, is the greatest disparity in sizes of any of the Finger Lakes. And that relates to what's called the hydraulic retention time, which is very low. Hydraulic retention time is the amount of time that water remains in the lake. So with a very large watershed, water tends to mobilize and move very quickly through the watershed, through the lake, and outletting from the lake. The reason that's important is because in a system with low retention time, hydraulic retention time, in a system that has such a large watershed, some of the manifestations of pollution that are perceived can be perceived much more quickly. The flip side of that, and the positive side of that, is that improvements that are made, improvements in land use practices that can reduce some of those manifestations, can also be perceived more quickly. So we really have a nice case study here, is one of the Finger Lakes, to demonstrate perhaps how quickly we can recover.
So when you say retention, are you talking about water flowing through the outlet? Are you talking about water coming into the lake?
The amount of time that water resides in the lake. It's about 3 or 4 years for OWASCO Lake. Very short. Skaneateles Lake is something like 18 years. So you can imagine the benefits of any improvements that are made would be perceived much later for a lake like Skaneateles relative to a lake like
things
OWASCO.
go bad relatively quick with a smaller.
That's exactly right. Okay. And indeed, that was shown in the fact that OWASCO Lake was the first Finger Lake to have observed algal blooms, harmful algal blooms, 2014. And in 2016 was the first observation of cyanotoxins within the finished drinking water.
And so that was where Governor Cuomo came in with some money for both Auburn and OWASCO to help them with their treatment plants.
That's correct, millions of dollars. And so that treatment in the city of Auburn is called powdered activated carbon. In the town of OWASCO is granular activated carbon. That carbon filtration approach is considered a top-down approach. So it's sort of dealing with the problem after it is already in place, after it's already occurred. Whereas the scientific literature for water quality and watershed management more so supports the benefits and the value of a bottom-up approach. And a bottom-up approach in this case is a preventive approach, a proactive approach, if you will. And what we target is the limiting nutrient. And this is something, if you recall, we discussed briefly last time I was here. The limiting nutrient for this freshwater system is phosphorus. And limiting nutrient means it is the nutrient that is in lowest quantity relative to an organism's need for growth. So if you and I were to ingest all of the calories in the world, but we didn't have adequate potassium, vitamins, vitamin C, other nutrients, we would cease to grow. And so for freshwater systems, typically you target phosphorus because it is in the lowest quantity relative to that organism's need to grow.
Okay, so let's take these off in bite-sized chunks.
Sure.
So let's deal with rules and regulations. You said a bottom-up approach, so I would assume that the rules and regulations you've been charged with promulgating have been to do this bottom-up process.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah, the number one objective is to target reductions in phosphorus loading to the lake.
So what are you proposing?
The rules and regulations have a number of specific criteria for setbacks for septic systems, setbacks for certain agricultural land use practices like the piling of manure, much more specific guidelines than our current watershed rules and regulations that are still very useful. The current rules and regulations say that no pollution shall be discharged into a watercourse within the watershed. Very broad, but I think we're all identifying that those rules and regs are outdated, and it's important to have some specific criteria in place that people can follow.
So where are you on? You've set up rules that people can go online and look at. So
that's right.
Where are you in the process? Have they been approved?
So they have not been officially approved to be implemented yet. The rules and regulations rewrite process was overarchingly led and still is by Cayuga County, especially the planning department.
Okay.
There were a couple of groups formed, the steering committee, as well as the rules and regulations working group. Now, where they are at the process, we've had, if you recall, this last spring, we've had both stakeholder public meetings as well as broader public meetings. And based on those meetings and the public's opportunity to review the watershed rules and regulations, there have been public comments given. The end of October, the working group completed collating and forming their responses to public comments. Now,
So not necessarily changing the proposed rules, just
and
responding.
that includes revisions where
okay.
where they were applicable.
Okay.
And so that document, the responses to public comment, as well as the revised watershed rules and regulations, will be shared together with the town of OWASCO and the city of Auburn for their review. The reason that's important is those municipalities represent the water purveyors, right, and water consumers. From that point, once locally everyone is on board with what we have set forth, we will provide those documents to state agencies. It includes the Department of Environmental Conservation as well as Ag and Markets.
Okay, so let's dice this a little bit
Yes.
thinner here. So you'll present these to the city and OWASCO. If they sign off, is that just one more check mark on the list, or because in the past the issue has been you could want to do all of this stuff to help OWASCO Lake, but unless the state of New York signs off on it, you can't be more restrictive than state. And they always blame the agriculture department. I don't know if it's in DEC, state ag, but they tend to blame the state. Is this something where you need to get OWASCO and Auburn on board, your steering committee, and then go to the state?
Yes, the objective here is transparency. We really want the public to be involved. We want all of the local players to be in agreement before these documents are submitted to the state.
So if they are in agreement, does the state then just rubber stamp it?
Essentially, we're looking for that rubber stamp.
Okay.
Yes.
So what's the timeline for process? Because you started, you were out there last March and April,
Yep.
starting to sell the idea. I'm sure you did some work beforehand
Sure.
to get to your first public meeting. What's your timeline, do you think, to get the state to agree to this?
It's not clear.
Will you have more? So when you present to the city in OWASCO, does that mean you will still do more public hearings, or is the public comment period off, other than if somebody goes to a city council meeting or a town of OWASCO board meeting and makes a comment there?
From what I understand, these documents are considered working documents until they get that rubber stamp, as you say, from the state.
Okay.
Yeah, and so part of this submission and review by the city and the town of OWASCO will include making these documents public again on the planning department's webpage.
Have you had any pushback?
There's been some pushback, yes, yeah. So representatives from Ag and Markets would like to see improved
State ag and markets or local agricultural?
state Ag and Markets.
Okay.
Requested that there was greater involvement with both Tompkins and Onondaga counties. And since that request, there has been an improved request for involvement with those counties. We have had more attendance by the Soil and Water Conservation District director from Tompkins County at our Watershed Inspection Committee meetings, and a lot of sort of exchange with those groups. So I think that relationship is improving.
When will you present to the city council and the town council?
I don't know. I don't.
Okay.
I wish I could tell you now. I know that, again, we have...
But until you make those presentations, what is being proposed is not being released to the public.
That's true,
Okay.
yes. Yep.
So let's talk about the year that was.
Sure.
Okay, so let's a couple different breakdowns of this. For the OWASCO, and we should say this off the bat. Your charge is the OWASCO watershed, and I don't mean to be flippant in this, but your priority is OWASCO, not necessarily Cayuga or Lake Ontario or any of the lakes within Cayuga County. Am I correct on that?
That is correct, Yes.
I'm not saying you don't care.
Right. Well, we all reside in someone's watershed, right?
Okay.
So it's certainly important in sort of a greater way. But our target, of course, is OWASCO Lake. And the reason it's a target is because there's been a great deal of research conducted on this system. And that research has demonstrated that this system is mostly driven by non-point source or watershed pollution.
And when you say non-point source, what does that mean?
Okay, so non-point source, you can think about pollution that is generated from a number of different places. Point source pollution would be a factory discharge. Would be a very common one is a wastewater treatment facility discharge. Non-point source discharge.
Which was an issue 20 years ago with
yes.
Groton and Smith Corona.
Yes, yeah, and some of the early policies associated with the Clean Water Act in the 1970s really addressed those point source discharges very well, and there were market improvements that were seen based on new policies there. This is a much more complex problem, and the reason it's more complex is because those pollutant sources are great. There are many, and they're diverse. The sources include roadways. They include septic systems, failing septic systems. They include agricultural land use practices. So there are a number of different.
Are those your top three?
I think that those could be considered top sources.
Are they
absolutely.
in that particular rank of concern?
No.
So what's your biggest concern? Is you're trying to protect and regenerate OWASCO Lake?
The biggest concern is addressing improved land use practices. And that is why the watershed rules and regulations have been such a target objective for us. This is a situation where we've identified the single driver that we can have an effect on, that we can change. That is nutrient loading. There are other drivers to harmful algal blooms. There are indications that increased temperatures in the lake have led to more blooms, as well as the presence of dry-scented mussels, quagga mussels, zebra mussels have led to more blooms.
Because they clear the water, make it less cloudy. Am I correct on this?
Well, yeah, so those
I'm trying
mussels
to do this in lay terms.
Sure. Yeah. So the
If
mussels.
you want science, wrong show.
So the mussels filter the water. That can lead to improved water clarity, or another way of looking at reduced turbidity.
Right.
Okay.
My favorite.
You like
20-cent word. That's a Professor Halfman word from the Finger Lakes Institute over in Geneva.
That's right. And as part of their metabolism, they can consume quite a bit of oxygen. So they can be an issue in the lower layers of water bodies where they deplete oxygen for other wildlife. But in terms of their connection with harmful algal blooms, not entirely clear. Recent surveys have been done to show that these mussels are pervasive along the bottom of the lake. They even exist subsurface, so when you dive deep into the sediments, they're still there, which was sort of a surprising finding. But I think there's a general consensus that they are involved with what's considered internal nutrient loading. So they're kicking nutrients back up.
So 30 years ago, we didn't have zebra mussels. We were trying to prevent them in all of our lakes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so that has led to this, and I don't mean evolution or devolution, you can use whatever term you want. It's changed the lakes that much in 30 years.
Yes,
by having something new entered into the system.
It's remarkable.
Okay.
Absolutely remarkable.
So let's talk about the work that you've been doing in the last year. So you have an inspection program. Do you have an idea of how many violations you handed out in 2019?
We have not collated that information yet. I know it's certainly up from 2018, especially since the end of this year we have the new deputy on board. So I can't make comment on that yet.
So when you do that, that is when somebody gets a violation, what are they required to do? Give me an example of what a violation would be.
Okay, so a violation could simply be trash or refuse too close to a water course.
Okay, so what do I have to do? You send me a violation?
Yep, notice a violation. You have the opportunity to make good on that violation. Does that erase that violation? Does it avoid any? Yes, you are in good standing. Again, if you deal with your trash and you remove it from the close proximity adjacent to a water course,
and if you don't?
And if you don't, you are fined.
Okay, and how much are the fines?
The fines are variable depending on what is observed.
So is it $100? Is it $1,000? Is it $10,000?
So the decision on the amount to be fined comes from the Department of Health. They are the enforcement body. So if you look at...
You hand out the violation.
Yes.
So you're like the cop.
So yes, yeah.
And they're the judge, jury, and whatever.
Yes.
Okay.
You've got it.
All
Yep.
right. Again, trying to make this as simple as... So of the violations that you have given out,
Yes.
again, not getting a specific number, as a percentage, are most of them remediated, or do you see a lot of people paying fines?
That's a great question. So, of course, the greater objective is compliance here. That's the whole purpose. Overwhelmingly, people make improvements. You know, in that example, that individual will typically remove their trash from the watercourse. So I think that's a great sign. More recently, we have had some violations that have moved into the enforcement phase.
Which was not generally the case before you came on.
That was not generally the case. And I think that we will observe with an approval of new watershed rules and regulations that there may be more cases that go further than just compliance that need to be enforced. Reason being is because that there will be more that is asked of watershed residents.
So if the health department decides that a fine should be levied, and they do, where does the money go? Does it go to fund your office?
It does not go back into the Watershed Management Council as far as I understand it. No, it does not. And that is a question I will have to bring to the Department of Health. I'm curious myself. I don't know.
Okay, because in some cases there's always been the issue of when you get a speeding ticket, how much does the town get, how much does the state get,
yes,
and how much does the middleman get, and all that as well.
Yes, it's a good question.
So would you say this year, Cayuga County, or not Cayuga County, Owasco Lake had was better this year compared to last year, worse when it came to whether it's harmful algal blooms? Where did the lake stack up this year?
Okay, so that's a great question, and I think that's a tough question to answer in any specific way. Reason being that the blooms, the harmful algal blooms, are very discrete in both time and space. So they appear for typically short periods of time, and they appear at very random seeming locations, more so along the shorelines, and that the belief there is that their location is typically wind driven. So you're asking about essentially this.
So were there more this year of the blooms than last year?
So
last year kind of sounded like a horror story compared to the year before.
Yeah,
even worse.
That's right. So
one of the reasons why you're here.
Yes, that's right. So if you look at the New York HAB's website. This is a website that is driven and operated by the New York State DEC. They have shown over 40 blooms this year that were suspicious blooms. And I say suspicious because they're not confirmed unless they're lab run and lab analyzed. Last time I looked, it was over 40 blooms this year, and I saw a report, someone indicated over 50. Now, that's still less than last year, which I understand was quite a bit more, but it's really important to consider the fact that the surveillance program associated with that HABS, that New York State DEC HABS New York website, is not a hard science. So essentially,
are these the buoys?
They're not the buoys.
It's the visual.
They're volunteer
walking the shore.
Walking the shore, taking pictures, making observations.
So did the blooms this year have an impact on swimming?
I believe there was a beach closure at least once. I have to check on that. Don't hold me to that.
How about did it impact recreational besides swimming?
Well, certainly. I think that's hard to measure, though, right? I mean, I think it's important for us to get better at measuring performance metrics, right? So to what extent?
You could measure water, though.
Well, you can measure
drinking water. How did it impact drinking water this year?
So there was microcystin, which is the liver toxin, observed and measured at the finish water for the city of Auburn, and they had been pumping that powder-activated carbon through the fall, end of summer through fall.
And did it take care of that, so nobody was drinking?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yes. So there's
no microcystin.
No, absolutely not. No.
So last 5 minutes, let's talk about money.
Okay.
Because
Sure.
well, how you're funded and all that. So
Yes.
you have a budget of about what? $234,000 is roughly your budget.
That sounds right.
A
Yeah.
lot of that comes from the city of Auburn and town of OWASCO, correct?
Correct.
How much do they give you roughly? And they've increased, if I remember correctly. They both the city and the town have increased in the last year, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So as you say, we are vastly local government grant funded. The city of Auburn was contributing $150,000 to our annual budget, and the town of OWASCO was at $20,000. And so what we did is we calculated the rate of contribution, rather the amount of money that was given to the budget relative to the volume of water purveyed to residents. And that rate was greater for the town of OWASCO. And the city of Auburn, they wanted to meet that rate. They also wanted to demonstrate their support for our cause, again, that proactive, preventive approach. So they decided to meet the rate, and in doing so, brought their contribution up to $200,000 for our 2020 projected budget.
And you get some money from both Fleming and Scipio, am I correct on that?
That's correct, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, they increased, Fleming increased their contribution to $7,000 this year.
These are all voluntary contributions.
These are voluntary contributions, that's
correct.
correct.
But in the case of OWASCO and Auburn, because they purvey water, do they make that as part of their rate structure? Do they add that on?
Yes,
So
yes.
when I turn on the tap,
Yeah.
I'm paying into that fund.
Yes, it is embedded in their water fees. From what I understand, the town of OWASCO has changed that somewhat. I think it might come from their general fund now. But they both support our cause and are aware of the need for funding for us to continue to build capacity.
And how many municipalities are in the watershed?
Well, let's see. So we have, I believe it's 15 towns, right, and 2 villages. So we're looking at 17. Then we also have the city of Auburn, right? Not in the watershed, mind you, right? But stand to benefit from
and
an
you
improved.
would like another 6 to 8 communities to chip in as well.
That's correct.
So
yes.
what are you asking of them?
Well, so we're starting with a request for $2,000 as an annual contribution to the budget, just as a demonstration of their willingness to support, again, the lakes.
And we only have a minute or
the
so
mission.
left. So with that, some of them are putting their budgets together for the end of the fiscal year. So
right.
are you in conversation with them now?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So some of
What's
them.
the feedback you're getting?
Positive feedback. Yeah, positive feedback. I think there's a request that we develop a contract and a commitment letter. So it's something that they can track well and we can track well. And for some of the villages, they have a little bit of a different annual structure, so we'll revisit that come spring.
You'd also like them to also work with you to leverage some grant money. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. Yes, the council is now positioned to independently write grants, which is tremendous. We are registered with New York State Grants Gateway. I was just wrapping up on grants.gov, which is the federal gateway for grant proposals. But it really is important that we partner, right? Because when you write a proposal, you need a project, right? And you need partners. You need letters of support. So there needs to be a demonstration that local groups are on board.
Are you getting much more support for that than maybe the financial side?
Well, interestingly, we're getting quite a bit of support right now from local consultants who have an interest in piloting new projects for advanced phosphorus removal technologies. So an interesting relationship has developed whereby they're willing to help compose some of the proposal narrative while I can work through much of the administrative
Do they
needs.
do that for a fee?
No fee, no, because this could be a mutually beneficial relationship, right? Yeah.
So our guest for the last half hour has been Dr. Adam EFFLER, the OWASCO Lake Watershed Management Council's Executive Director. And I want to thank you for giving us an OWASCO Lake update. I hope once you get the regulations out and about, you would be more than willing to come back on and tell us. You also have a staff person on for much longer than just a couple weeks.
Yes, I would be happy to do so.
And we are delighted that you're in the studio with us today. We'll be back on Tuesday as we finish our fall 2019 session here, or season here, next Tuesday with former New York State Senator John DeFrancisco. We'll be talking about his new book, Never Say Never, which is a great page turner, and everyone is trying to look to see where they ended up in the book. And City Manager Jeff Dygert will be here for a City Council update. We'll most likely be talking to him about sewer and water rates as well as sales tax and most assuredly the Auburn Double Days. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know that you can send us your ideas for questions and guests for the future on Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page. You can send them to cozguytho@aol.com or Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for Community College. We thank you for watching. We hope you have a great weekend and hope to see you back here in the studio on Tuesday for our final set of shows.